Hi there, and welcome to this introduction to Philippians and Colossians. Over the next 8 weeks, we're going to be looking at those passages and seeing what God has to say to us through them. Let me start off by saying something really controversial. You'll have heard it said there are 66 books in the Bible. I question that. It's okay, don't panic. But when Paul was writing to the Philippians and the Colossians, he didn't sit down and think, I think I'll write a book about Christian truth and lots of godly ideas and so on. What should I call it? I know, I'll call it Philip. It wasn't like that at all. Philippians and Colossians are letters written by a real person to real people in a real situation. It's wonderful, the fact that still today we're reading them and the truths are helping us and encouraging us, but nevertheless they are letters written to particular people. And I think if we embrace that, it can really change how we kind of approach things. I've got a couple of letters here that I received just before Christmas. One says, Dear Mr. Ford, which immediately says something about my relationship with this person here. It's got a reference number, it's got a UTR. It's got, and then he signs himself, yours sincerely. That tells me stuff about the nature of my relationship with Chris Barstow, who in fact represents, wait for it, Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs. So you tremble when you get those letters. I have to say this one had a rather nice check enclosed. Another letter here came, it says, Dear Ken and Heather. Dear Ken and Heather. Oh, isn't that lovely? It's signed, Love From. These are friends. These are people we know well. Pete and Leslie Light. I traveled the world many times with Pete many years ago. So knowing that a letter comes from a particular person with whom we have a particular relationship or not a particular relationship can really enlarge our appreciation of what the letter's all about. So Philippians and Colossians, they have some significant similarities. They're both written around about the same time, 61, 62 AD, and they're written by Paul. If you go deeply into all this, there are theologians and scholars who will, well, I don't know if it is Paul. The style isn't quite right. And let me just share with you what I picked up as the general opinion. And Paul wrote them, and he wrote them while he was in prison in Rome. I think it's interesting. He mentions a number of times that he was in chains and all that kind of stuff. Isn't it interesting that Paul was in lockdown, like serious lockdown, guards and all that sort of thing? And is this the most fruitful time of his ministry? Possibly it is, writing the letters. But anyway, we don't know if he was actually in prison in the sense of a cell and bars and all that kind of thing. We think it was probably a bit like house arrest. And he was able to receive visitors, but he certainly had guards because he talks about giving them the gospel. Read about Acts 28:30, just talks a little bit about his home situation. But he was certainly able to receive visitors and send out his letters, which is where these came from. In terms of Philippians, Paul had a wonderful close relationship with the church in Philippi. He was involved in planting it. Lovely, read in Acts 16, the whole story, just great. He goes to Philippi with Paul and Silas and Timothy. There's no synagogue there, but he ends up by the river with a lady called Lydia, and she and her husband get saved. The next person to get saved, or in fact, is the Philippian jailer and his family. Just a wonderful way to see a church starting with all sorts of odd characters. Sounds a bit familiar, doesn't it? And then Paul visited the church in Philippi again on his third missionary journey, about 55 AD. So he's got a really, really close, warm relationship with these people. And that comes out over and over again in his letter. Lots and lots of encouraging words. It's very warm. What's happened is that a guy called Epaphroditus has come to see Paul in Rome, bringing a gift, again, bringing out the relationship issue. And while Epaphroditus has been there, he's been very ill, nearly died, but he's recovered. Now he's coming back to bring news of Paul. But when Epaphroditus came, he brought news of some issues and things that had, challenges that had come to the church. It's a church. Let's talk about it. And so the letter is full of lots of advice, lots of encouragement, lots of things that Paul feels it'd be good for them to do. But it is very, very gentle. It's encouraging. There's no kind of sharp, dictatorial, you must do this kind of tone to it at all. It's very, very warm, which comes out of his relationship with the people there in Philippi. Colossae was a bit different. I'm not suggesting that Paul's relationship with Colossae was like my relationship with Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, but he'd never actually been there. There's no record in Acts of the church in Colossae being established. The guess is, the thinking is, that while Paul was in Ephesus, a group went out from there and did a bit of outreach in Colossae, and the church was established that way. So his relationship with Colossae is slightly different. Not saying he's in any way heavy or unpleasant, but not as warm as it was with the Philippians, who he knew quite well. What's happened here is that news has come. We think a guy called Epaphras brought it. News has come of some pretty serious issues arising in the church in Colossae. Alongside the teaching that had been established in the early days, all sorts of other stuff is coming through. Stuff to do with Gnosticism, which is to do with, it's all to do with your intellect. A lot of dietary laws, holy days, the worship of angels, all sorts of paganist ideas, strange mixture of stuff trying to come into the teaching. And the effect that Paul is most concerned about is that Jesus is being brought down to part of the problem, part of the solution, part of what people need to get hold of. And Paul is clearly incensed by this. And so what he does, he expresses his interest. There is care and there's interest and love expressed. But then he starts warning them against this other stuff that's coming in. He says, beware and don't let anyone. He's really concerned. And then he goes for it in refuting this false teaching. And what he majors on is Jesus. So he talks about the unmatched glory of Christ, the total sufficiency of Christ. He is the Son of God. He is the Redeemer. He is the Lord of creation, and he's head of the church. And right through Colossians, that's the theme, the emphasis that Paul is bringing out. Like I say, not in a heavy, nasty, dictatorial way, but boy, he is moved passionately, and he wants them to really reestablish the fact that the cross and the resurrection of the Lord Jesus is the only means by which man can be reconciled to God. So it's more strong and more direct than in the Philippian letter. So there you go. I hope that's helpful. What will happen is that week by week, somebody will take a chapter. I promise you, I think I can promise you, they won't go verse by verse by verse, but just look at the general theme and maybe pick out something particular from that chapter. But as I said earlier on, isn't it wonderful that Paul, sitting there 2,000 years ago, probably had no idea that we would now be looking at these encouragements, these instructions, these directions, these guidances he brings, and finding them helpful and encouraging as we seek in our generation, in our time, in the slot that we've got, the bit that we're on for, to bring the wonderful news of Jesus into this world. And I'm sitting here on Wednesday morning. Is it Wednesday? No, it's Thursday the 7th. And boy, oh boy, does our world need Jesus. So God bless you. Hope you'll enjoy these next few weeks. Take care.